What if I told you the very first human death wasn't an accident, but a murder committed by a brother? A murder that didn't begin with hatred, but with a jealous heart that refused to bow to God. This is the story of Cain and Abel, and it's not just ancient history. It's the spiritual war that still rages inside every soul today. I divide this story into 9 different chapters we explore one by one. After Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden, they were no longer covered in God's glory. The ground was cursed. The pain of life was now real. But even in their exile, God allowed new life to be born. Their first son, Cain, his name meant acquired, a strong earthly name tied to the land, a man of the soil. Their second, Abel, meaning breath or vanity in Hebrew, a delicate name as if prophetically hinting his life would be fleeting. 2 brothers, 2 destinies, but only one heart was truly chasing God. As they grew, each man found his role. Cain worked the land. He toiled with the cursed ground, planting, harvesting, sweat on his brow, calloused hands. Abel watched over the flocks. He saw life, birth, movement. He understood the cost of life, blood. Then came the moment of offering, a test of the heart. God didn't need the fruit or the lamb. He wanted something deeper, true worship, surrender, honor. Abel came before God with the firstborn of his flock, the fat portions, the best he had. Cain, on the other hand, came with some fruits, no details, no mention of first or best, just some. And this is where everything unraveled. God accepted Abel's offering, but Cain's he rejected. Why? Because God sees what man hides. God looked into their hearts. Abel gave with love, reverence, and sacrifice. Cain gave with pride, obligation, maybe even resentment. Cain burned inside. His face fell, his hands clenched. He didn't say it, but he was screaming with jealousy. God saw him, and in mercy, he spoke. Why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Genesis 4:6-7. This was God's warning. Sin is like a beast, waiting in the shadows. It doesn't knock. It crouches, hungry for your weakness. But Cain didn't listen. He let sin in. He fed it. He let it grow. Then, a chilling moment. Cain said to Abel, "Let's go out to the field. That's all. No rage, no fight, just an invitation." But behind that calm voice was a storm. And in the quiet field, when no one was watching, Cain became the first murderer. He didn't kill a stranger. He didn't strike an enemy. He killed his own brother. And with that blow, the earth tasted blood for the first time. "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground," God would later say. This wasn't just a crime. It was a spiritual scream, a defilement of creation itself. The soil, already cursed, now swallowed the innocent blood of a righteous man. Chapter 2, The Confrontation, God's Voice in the Aftermath of Murder. What happens when you silence your brother, but forget you can't silence God? Cain may have buried his brother, but the ground itself screamed, and heaven was already watching. Cain thought it was over. No witnesses, no shouts, no justice. But with one act, Cain had committed the unthinkable. Not just the first murder in human history, but the first cold-blooded rejection of brotherhood, of family, of life. Then God speaks, not in thunder, not in flames, but with a question. "Where is your brother Abel?" Genesis 4:9. "Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain's life wasn't taken, it was emptied. He would live, but he would never belong again. No land would welcome him, no soil would feed him, no place would call him son. He became a soul with no roots, a man with no peace. But what did Cain say next? He didn't cry for forgiveness. He didn't fall in repentance. He cried for himself, "My punishment is more than I can bear." Even now, his focus wasn't on what he had done, but on what it would cost him. And yet, God still marked him, not to curse, but to protect. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Genesis 4. This mark wasn't mercy, it was a divine warning. Don't try to play God with judgment. Cain's life became a living symbol of what happens when jealousy, pride, and sin go unchecked, of how far we fall when we ignore the voice of God, of how sin, once welcomed, becomes the master. Chapter 3, Abel's blood and Jesus' blood, the cry that speaks better things. What if I told you that Abel's blood never stopped speaking? But there came a day when another blood cried out louder, for mercy, not revenge. After Cain murdered Abel, the Bible tells us something powerful. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground, Genesis 4:10. Abel's blood cried out for justice, for vengeance, for truth. But centuries later, the book of Hebrews reveals something even deeper. You have come to Jesus, to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Pause and reflect. What does that mean? Abel's blood cried against sin. Jesus' blood cried for the sinner. Abel's blood revealed guilt. Jesus' blood releases grace. Abel died as a victim of jealousy. Jesus died as a volunteer, willingly, for the sake of Cain-like hearts. This is the beauty hidden inside the horror of Genesis 4. The story of Cain and Abel isn't just a record of the first murder, it's the first shadow of the cross. Where Abel's blood sank into the earth, Jesus' blood soaked a wooden beam. Where Abel's blood cursed Cain to wander, Jesus' blood invites the wandering home. God didn't ignore Abel's cries, but he answered them in Jesus, not just with justice, but with a path to redemption. This is why the story matters, because we are all Cain. We've all had pride. We've all hated, compared, envied, or hurt. We've all ignored the warning signs at the door. And yet, God didn't leave us in exile. He came looking, not just to ask, "Where is your brother?" "Come home, child. I've paid the price with better blood." Chapter 4. Why God rejected Cain's offering, the hidden heart behind the sacrifice. What if the key to understanding God's rejection of Cain's offering wasn't about what he gave, but how he gave it? In Genesis 4, Cain and Abel both bring offerings to God. Abel offers a lamb from his flock, the best of the best, while Cain offers the fruits of his field. What was wrong with Cain's offering? At first glance, it might seem like Cain simply didn't offer a blood sacrifice like Abel. But digging deeper, the truth is far more profound. God didn't reject Cain's offering because of the substance. Both men were offering what they had. It wasn't about what Cain gave, but why he gave it. The Bible doesn't explicitly tell us the motive behind Cain's gift, but it does describe Abel's offering as being made with faith. Hebrews 11:4 states, "By faith Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain." Cain's offering, on the other hand, was tainted by his heart's attitude. It wasn't just a matter of what Cain chose to give, but how he approached the giver. Cain's offering was probably rushed, perhaps unprepared, and most importantly, ungrateful. There's no mention of Cain bringing his best or doing it out of reverence for God. In contrast, Abel's offering was a sacrifice, a lamb, the best of his flock, offered with reverence, respect, and faith in God's promises. Cain's heart was filled with pride and selfishness. He might have thought, well, I'll just give whatever, it's good enough for God. But God, in his mercy, rejected the offering to expose Cain's heart. It wasn't about the quality of the gift, it was about the quality of the heart behind it. Cain's heart was rebellious, and his offering reflected that. He wanted to worship God on his own terms, without acknowledging God's sovereignty or acknowledging the need for a sacrifice. Abel, on the other hand, knew something Cain didn't understand. Worship requires humility, surrender, and the acknowledgement of God's ultimate authority. God's rejection of Cain wasn't just a punishment, it was a mercy. God, in his justice, couldn't accept Cain's empty offering, but in his love, he gave Cain a chance to repent. God said to Cain, "If you do what is right, will you not be accepted?" Genesis 4. It's not about what we bring to God, but how we come before him. If we come before God with a heart of humility, ready to offer our best, acknowledging his supremacy and coming with faith, then he will accept us, just as he accepted Abel's offering. But if we approach God with pride, thinking our efforts are good enough, because we are good enough, we'll always be met with rejection, not from God's wrath, but from his invitation to change and grow. Chapter 5, Cain's choice, the path of anger, jealousy, and exile. Cain wasn't cursed because of his offering, but because of what he chose next. Instead of repenting, Cain grew bitter. His pride turned to jealousy, and jealousy gave birth to anger. God warned him lovingly, "Sin is crouching at your door, but you must rule over it." Genesis 4:7. But Cain didn't fight the sin, he opened the door. This was the moment when he became a slave to his own darkness. Chapter 6, the murder in the field, first blood spilled on earth. The first murder in history wasn't committed by a stranger, but by a brother. Cain led Abel into the field, maybe pretending it was a walk. But there, in cold blood, he murdered the one whom God had just honored. It wasn't just jealousy. Abel's blood cried out from the ground, not just for vengeance, but for truth. This wasn't just a crime, it was a turning point for humanity. Chapter 7, God's confrontation and the curse on Cain. God didn't send fire. He asked a question. Where is your brother, Abel? God wasn't seeking information. He was offering Cain a chance to confess. But Cain lied. Am I my brother's keeper? So God declared a curse. Cain would be a restless wanderer. The ground would no longer yield crops for him. He wanted to sow in sin, but he would reap in sorrow. Yet even in punishment, God showed mercy. He marked Cain so no one would kill him. Grace, even for a murderer. The mark of Cain, a sign of judgment or mercy. What was the mysterious mark God gave Cain? A curse or protection? The Bible doesn't describe the mark in detail, but its purpose was clear, to protect Cain from being killed by others. A symbol that even when we fall far, God doesn't give up on us. Cain left God's presence, but God never left Cain's story. That's the painful beauty of grace. It follows even the broken. The legacy of Cain, a warning for all generations. The legacy of Cain, a warning for all generations. Cain's story didn't end in blood, it echoes in every generation. Cain's descendants built cities, made music, forged tools, yet they lived outside of God's presence. Cain's life became a warning sign that pride, if left unchecked, leads to destruction. His story teaches us the danger of jealousy, the power of choice, and the depth of God's mercy. Abel died, but his faith speaks even now, reminding us to choose faith over pride, obedience over ego, and humility over anger. Overall lesson: Cain and Abel weren't just two brothers, they were the first mirror of human choice. One chose humility, the other chose pride. One gave his best to God, the other gave what was convenient. One's blood cried out from the earth, the other walked with a burden he'd never escape. But the real tragedy isn't just that Cain killed Abel, it's that Cain ignored God's warning, ignored his mercy, and refused to fight the sin rising inside him. And this is the lesson for all of us. Sin still crouches at the door. And like Cain, we too must choose. Do we let it rule us, or do we rule over it? Your choices today shape your legacy tomorrow. Will you walk in God's favor like Abel, or wander like Cain? If this story opened your eyes, if it stirred something deep in your soul, don't scroll away. Subscribe right now for more Bible stories like you've never heard before.